Hello everyone, welcome to today's tutorial and shout out to both my old and new subscribers. And if you're just joining us, you haven't subscribed yet, come on, what are you waiting for? Subscription is absolutely free. So our today's project is on this beautiful pencil dress with backs at the waist line, and the upper part is going to comprise of both Ankara print and net lace. The lower part is going to be plain Ankara print on the sleeve and net lace on the lower sleeve. So here is the measurement I'll be working with. So this Ankara print is 6 yards. Though we'll not be needing everything, we'll be using up to 3 to 3.5 yards depending on your measurements, and the net lace is 1.5 yards. Now this is a cotton lining and it's 3 yards by 45 and a soft interfacing for fusing the upper parts of our bodies and even the band of the sleeve, and the zipper to go with it. So let's get started. First thing is to mark out the starting point. So here I'm marking out the back length to waist measurements, 17 inches. Some call it bodice front, others call it half length. And the next is armhole measurement, and this is back length to waist divided by 2 plus half an inch. Altogether 9 inches. And the next is the waist to hip measurement, 8.5, but I'll be taking 9.5 simply because I'm going to have a backs at the waist and I need the allowance to stitch it together. So the next thing to mark out now is the back width measurement. The back width is 16 inches divided by 2, 8 inches. So I'll replicate that also on the bust line. So this is going to be our armhole. Neck width of 3 inches. And then shoulder slope 1 inch. We draw the shoulder seam. So here I'm coming down with 1.5 inches. This line is going to be the true bust or bust point. Here I'm determining the midpoint on the armhole, and then I'll mark. I'll be coming in by 0.5. So I'm going to draw a straight line from that point to the shoulder. So before I draw the curve, I'm going to be inserting the quarter bust measurement of 10 inches. And then I'm adding 0.5 for ease. So I'm curving the armhole. Next we take the bust span, and this is for the front is chest width divided by 4. 14.2 divided by 4 equals 3.55. So approximately here I'm marking out 3.6. So this is what they call the nipple to nipple as well. So from the hip line I'm marking up 2 inches, and from the bust point I'm taking down 1 inch. And the dart intake here will be 1 inch, half an inch on either side of this dart line. So the neck depth I'll be marking out here is 7 inches, and I'm increasing the neck width by 2 inches. So altogether the neck width is 5 inches and the neck depth is 7 inches. Now this you can do according to your preference. I'm inserting the quarter waist measurement 8.5 for this project. And the hip measurements, quarter hip measurements, I'm going to minus 0.5. I'm going to be adding that 0.5 to the back bodies because the back, so it can accommodate the bum at the back. So here I'm taking down the back's measurement 6 inches. The back's measurement can be between 4 to 5 inches. The extra 1 inch is stitching allowance. And then next we take down the dress length, and this is 54 inches plus 2 inches hem allowance. And then we add the side seam allowance of 1.5. You can do between 1 to 2 inches. That allowance 1 inch, and then side seam allowance 1.5. The same also on the hip line 1.5. So we join the side seam together from the bust there to the hemline. But before we get to the hemline, we need to work on the hemline. So whatever we have on the hip here is 13.5 inches. We're going to minus 1.5, so giving us 12 inches. So that's what we're going to have at the hemline because the dress is a pantsuit dress. So let's continue drawing the side seam. We're going to draw it all the way to the hemline. Now we're going to draw the backs from the waist to that point where we brought down 6 inches. Remember, I've already added allowance because we are going to split that side, or we're going to cut that side into 2. I'm adding allowances to the shoulder, 0.5 inch, and also to the armhole, 0.5 inch. So the next thing is to cut out the front bodies. So I'm separating the upper parts from the lower parts. Can you see the back's effect? So we notch on the dart. This is to help us know where to hold the dart when we are stitching. So the body's front is done. Now onto the back. Here I'm bringing down 1 inch for the starting point. The back and the front is basically the same, measurements are the same. It's just the armhole where you don't go in by 0.5 and there's no backs also. So back length to waist measurements of 17 inches. Same armhole measurements as the front. The same waist to hip measurements that I took for the front, 9.5 inches with 1 inch stitching allowance at the waist. Next, we take down the dress length of 45 inches and 2-inch hem allowance. And then I'm marking out 2 inches here to give space for the zipper allowance. This is going to go all the way to the hem line. And then we draw a straight line from that point to the hem line. So here I'm inserting half back width measurement or shoulder measurement of 8 inches, the same also on the bust line. This is to create our armhole. Three inches neck width. Also note where I'm taking the measurement from, and then 1 inch shoulder slope. Next, I'm inserting the bust, quarter bust measurement, 10.5. It's 10 inches, but 0.5 is for ease. And then drawing the arm curve. So here I'm inserting bust span, and this is the back width divided by 4. The back width is 16 inches divided by 4. We have 4 inches. I inserted on the bust line, the waistline, and the hip line. Going up by 2 inches from the hip line, and then taking the dart intake, half an inch on either side of the dart line. So I'm taking the back width, the neck width, 5 inches, and then the neck depth of 1 inch. So I'm inserting the waist measurement plus that allowance and hem allowance, the same hem allowance of 1.5. Now on the hip, remember I minus 0.5 from the front hip. I'm going to place that after that line that you're seeing. And then I'm going to curve it as seen. Now I'm still going to insert the quarter hip measurement from this point, not from the parts I curved, but from the parts where the zipper is supposed to be. The hemline, I'm going to measure the hemline of the front bodice and then replicate that on the back bodice. So we connect the side seam from the armhole to the hemline. Now we are going to work on the waist. In order to eliminate the zipper bulge, we are going to go in by 3/4 of an inch. And draw a line all the way to the upper part around the bust line, and then this is going to go down close to the hip line. Our zip allowance is going to start from there as well. So we're taking down the zip allowance of 1 inch. Just watch carefully the way I'm taking the zipper allowance. So I'm going to take this all the way down to the hemline. I'm throwing the zipper allowance, and this part is a bit curved, so you can't use ruler to do it. You just use your hand to curve it, and then you can continue to use a ruler to draw the seam allowance, the zipper allowance. Now we're taking the shoulder allowance of 0.5. We are going to also take 0.5 on the armhole. Chewing the shoulder allowance. So I'm coming down by 0.5 because I'm going to cut that part. So the 0.5 is a stitching allowance. I'd already taken that when I was marking the waist to hip measurement. So separating the waist, the upper parts and the lower parts, and then we notch. Always remember to notch your dart lines. So next we'll be cutting the sleeve, and I'll be using a pattern that I already drafted. So here I'm coming down by 11 inches. The sleeve comprises of 3 parts: the upper part, the band, and the lower part. The band is 3 inches. Allowances have been added already. So it's time to cut our sleeve on the fabric. Before that, we are going to cut this for slash and spread. So here I'm marking out 1 inch apart. Now this is because we are going to have fullness at the lower part of this particular sleeve. So we're spreading it on the fabric. Now this is going to be 1 inch also. You can do up to 2 inches or more if you want, depending on how full you want the gathers to be. But here I'm marking out 1 inch apart, or I'm taking 1 inch fullness. So we determine the midpoint of the sleeve and then draw a straight line down. I'm using a pencil, but the reason is because I want to mark 2 inches down. Now we're going to connect from the sleeve side of the sleeve all the way to that 2 inches that I marked. Please note how I'm curving it. These 2 inches that I brought down is going to give it like a kind of full or falling effect when you gather that lower part. The sleeve for the 2 sleeves. So we notch the sleeve head. And also notch the front parts of the sleeve. Now this is the lower part of the sleeve that I'm making use of net lace. And also going to add 0.5 stitching allowance. You know we separated that part from the sleeve, so whatever you separate, you must add an allowance to fix it back. Also, I cut 2. So the next is the band of the sleeve, also cutting 2. And you know this is going to be attached to the upper part of the sleeve and the lower part of the sleeve. So both up and the down side will have stitching allowance. The stitching allowance is also 0.5. And this is how it's going to be. Here is going to be gathered. So next we cut out the lining for the bodice and the sleeve, the upper part and the band. Of course, the net lace will not be needing lining. So we're going to hold that part and notch the lining also, so you know where to hold when you're sewing also on the lining. You're sewing the darts on the lining, sorry. Now here's a method I use to stitch my dart, especially for the part that has not been marked. I measure it like this is the back bodice and it's 8.5 inches. So I'm going to write it down, back dart 8.5 inches. And then when I want to stitch the back dart of especially the lining, I'm going to hold it as seen and then I'll measure the 8.5 inches. The same thing I'm going to do for the front bodice. (9.5 inches), and then I'm going to write it down just like I did the back bodice. So cutting the lining of the lower part. Now the length of the lining will not be the same as the main fabric. The lining will be like 2 inches less. That is, I'm going to remove the hem allowance. So this is 2 inches, the hem allowance I'm folding. Because the lower part is going to be like, the hem is going to be like a turnover or something like that. Or turn up, is that what you call it? So I'm notching on the darts. I'm also going to measure the same process I use for the upper bodice, and I'll write it down. Now this is the lower part of the bodice front. The same process. I'm also going to remove the 2 inches for the hemline on the lining actually. So I'm going to cut that part off. Cutting the lining for the upper part of the sleeve. For both the 2 sleeves, and also the band has lining, but the lower part of the sleeve will not be needing lining, of course. So I'm going to be fusing this the upper part of the bodice and the band with this soft interfacing. Even the lining too. So here's how far I've gone. I've stitched the darts. I've held them together of every part that needs to be stitched. And then I gave it a press. All stitched up the dart lines. So I'm going to be trimming that part. Now because I didn't use pattern, so there was no way for me to like extend the dart head. So that is why we have this part to trim off. I'm also going to be doing the same on the upper part. So like I said earlier, the upper parts of the bodies is going to be both Ankara and net lace. So here I'm cutting out the net lace. Now the right side of the Ankara fabric is facing the wrong side of the net lace. Now so that when you turn it, the net lace is on the right side of the net lace is what we see. So we're going to stitch these parts together with 1/2 inch allowance that we left earlier. The same thing also for the lining. Whatever we do for the main fabric, we do to the lining. Now the back bodies of the lining, we're going to stitch on the waist because this part is the zipper side. The same thing for the main fabric. And make sure that the dot lines align of the upper part of the bodies and the lower parts when you're stitching. So when we're done, we stitch the shoulders together, the sides, and as you can see, it's done, and the zipper has been fixed as well. That is aligning as well. And also there's a slit at the back of this dress, 18 inches to be precise, so it depends on what you want. The same thing was done to the lining, only that of course the lining does not have a zipper, so that part is opened. And we're going to fix the lining to the main fabric. We begin with the neckline. Match every part, even the shoulder, and then pin. So we're going to stitch along this line and stop here. And then when we are done stitching this part, we then go ahead and stitch the hemline together before stitching the side of the zipper, or the zipper side here. So this is the hemline of both the lining and the main fabric. We're going to stitch it together. Now it is done, and this is how it's looking. I gave it a press. So what I did was, after stitching, I notched it and then gave it a, is it top stitch now or under stitch? All the same allowance will be on the lining, and then we stitch. Now this is the hemline. So what is left now is to stitch the zipper side, we're going to pin this part all the way to the hemline. Open every seam so that place will not be like looking bulky or something like that. So by the time you get to the hemline, you find that the main fabric is overlapping on the lining. Can you see that? So I've stitched the other side, so this is how it's looking. Stitching all done. Next we work on the sleeve. I've attached the lining to the upper part and also the lower part, the band, sorry. Now we shifted all the seam to the lining and then gave it a top stitch. So we're going to gather this part and then attach it to the band. And also sew the side seam of the sleeve. Now it's all done and I gave it a press. This is how the sleeve is looking. So the next thing to do is to attach the sleeve to the bodice. So we're going to hold both the main fabric and the lining together and then attach just like a seam. Open the seam and attach to the main fabric and then pin. We'll also pin the shoulder to the notch part of the sleeve head. So we're going to stitch all around. So our work is done. This is how the dress is looking, and I went ahead also to embellish the back side of the waist, the back, and then the shoulder. Thank you. So if you find this video useful, please give me a thumbs up. Bye.